My name is Patrick, and this is my story. I grew up on the southeast side of Cleveland. I've lived in Hamilton for about 5 years now. My childhood was very tumultuous, to say the least. I grew up in one of the rougher areas in Cleveland. I grew up not really knowing who my dad was. I would bounce back and forth from Cleveland to Denver, and I just really grew up a lot of my life not knowing who I was and not having any sense of identity because my dad wasn't there, and I was looking for affirmation. I found that in a lot of destructive ways that a lot of people do in those environments. I grew up around drug dealers, I grew up around violence, I grew up around crime, drug abuse, and eventually you start looking up to those people that are doing those kind of things. And to make a long story short, I found myself pulled heavily into that stuff as a kid. In 4th grade, I wanted to know who my dad was, and so he was living in Colorado, and I convinced my mom to let me go live out there and to spend some time with him and get to know him. I get out there and I had this grand picture in my mind of who my dad was going to be, and it was this nightmare. It was nothing but that, and went through a lot of abuse, a lot of dysfunction, and it's just a horrible environment. And so I eventually came back to Cleveland, even more so not knowing who I was. Getting suspended from school, getting in trouble. It just kind of progressed and progressed and progressed, and I eventually found myself headed down a road of destruction. When I was 15, I overdosed on acid, and they told my mom that I was never going to come out of a comatose state. I had drug dealers shooting at me, running me off the road. I got thrown through a window. Had people driving down my street with assault rifles wanting to kill me. Just very dramatic stuff, but I was so hard-headed, like I didn't care. I was self-destructive. I didn't care what I did to myself, and I didn't care what I did to people around me. I found myself at 16 years old, arrested for aggravated robbery and 5 counts of kidnapping, and when I was 16, I was facing 45 years in prison. Part of the reason why I ended up in prison was I started dealing drugs, and I had this drug dealer that would front me the drugs, and you sell your cut and then you bring him back his percentage. Well, my drugs disappeared one time, and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars worth of drugs. And I always joke about this, but that's one of my questions I have for God on that day is what did you do with my drugs? I don't want them back, you can have them, but what happened? Because there was a specific place I put them, and they weren't there. And anyway, so this guy, I didn't have his money, and he wanted to kill me. He wanted to take my life. I'm a 16-year-old kid. I felt like the only options at that time were either to rob somebody, get enough money to get out of town, or to shoot the guy before he shot me. And so I wasn't ready to kill somebody, and so I started robbing people, and that's how I ended up in that situation. The first time that I experienced God, it was through a drug dealer on the west side of Cleveland. And I was sitting in the juvenile detention center in Cuyahoga County up in Cleveland, and waiting to go to court, waiting to receive this sentence. So I'm freaking out, getting ready to lose my mind, and just really lost and broken. And just when I thought I couldn't get any worse, I'm sitting in there, I'm waiting to go to court. One of the correction officers comes to my cell. He knocks on the cell door. He said, "Hey man, I've got some bad news for you." I'm thinking, what is this, stand up? How could it get any worse? I'm 16. They just told me that I may do 45 years in prison. And he proceeds to tell me that my brother, Larry, he was 20 years old at the time, that he was murdered that previous night. When he told me that, I just flew into a fit of rage. I started fighting all the correction officers, fighting all the other inmates. Well, they subdued me. They put me in what they call the box. It was solitary confinement. Put me in there, and back to what I said about the drug dealer and my first experience with God. The prison was set up, you had the big main area, and then all the cells were on the outer perimeter. You could kind of see out, but you were still confined in that space. And this guy named Deshaun, he used to come to my cell door, and I was in there, I must have been in there for 6 months. And he would come up to my cell door, and he would lay on the ground, and he would whisper underneath my cell door, "Patrick, I'm so sorry that your brother's dead. I'm so sorry that you lost your brother. Hey, I want you to know that I'm thinking about you, man. I'm praying for you." And this drug dealer from the west side of Cleveland, he would come to my cell door, and he would flick Tutti Fruttis under my cell door. And he would do this for weeks and weeks and weeks, and I didn't answer him, I didn't respond, I didn't say anything back. I mean, I was broken. I cried myself to the point that there were no more tears, and here I am just like at the lowest point in my life because of the severity of my crime. They wouldn't let me go to my brother's funeral and see him buried. I mean, it just completely wrecked me. But every day, man, Deshaun would flick this candy under my door, and to me, like, that was the turning point in my life. It was that random act of kindness that this kid, like, we didn't know each other on the street. I didn't know him, but we had become friends, and in that space and in that time, and this random act of kindness that he cared enough to come to that cell door every day and flick candy under my door and tell me that he hadn't forgotten me. And I think that's what God looks like. And for me, that was the turning point. And so miraculously, through a series of events, I didn't end up doing 45 years in prison. I did what's called juvenile life. They sent me to a place called Tico in Columbus, and I was there for about 4.5 years. And it was in that 4.5 years that I regained my identity and I found out who I was. I was released from prison. I started writing music. I've been able to travel all over the world doing music, touring, recording albums. I mean, doing a lot of amazing stuff, but I've always felt compelled to go back into the prison system. And so, you know, I would go back in there periodically, do concerts, take musicians in there, play shows, share a little bit of my story, but I always felt like, man, there's gotta be more. There has to be more than this. And I would just hear these stories of people getting out that wanted to do the right thing, wanted to turn their lives around, but nobody would offer them that same random act of kindness that kid offered me when I was incarcerated. And I had this dream: what would it look like, man, to create an organization, to create a movement that offers that random act of kindness? What would it look like to create a business that would actually hire only ex-felons? What would it look like to create a community of faith, right? That's what this whole God thing is about in our minds. It's the God who is already in our midst, that has been there the whole time. What would it look like to create a community of faith that really did accept and welcome anybody that walked through the door? That's the dream, and that's the idea behind the French Coffee House. It's to be that hand of compassion and to say to people, hey, when you come home, there's a job waiting for you. Not only is there a job waiting for you, but here's a community of faith. Here's a group of people willing to help you get your GED, put your life back together. And so that's kind of the idea of the Coffee House. It's going to be a 9-month paid job training program that will offer a fair wage. We're not going to pay people slave wages. We're going to offer on-the-job training, so they'll have a resume, they'll have work history, which most of them have never had up in their life until now. If they need their GED, if there's educational barriers, we're going to help them with that. If there's the issues with their license, it's going to be a holistic plan developed for each person that works here. So hey, when you step out of that prison and you come out of that institution, here is a holistic movement that's going to just surround you with this compassion, this love, and this support. And so that's kind of the idea and the heart behind what we're doing. And I think, for me personally, and I'll wrap it up with this, if it wasn't for somebody giving me a chance, like, I can't imagine where I would be. And so, yeah, what would it look like to have something like that in this city? That's what we're trying to do here.